we're going to thank our sponsors for the summit this year. So we've got Ale House 1890, which is an ale house in Lancaster, Ohio. So go visit them if you're in the area. We also have the Law Office of Maritza S. Nelson. So if for your legal needs, you can always go to Maritza, based in Central Ohio. Equitas Health is also a sponsor. We are so grateful for their partnership on a whole host of things, including this. And then our final sponsor is OSHA, not the OSHA you think, but Ohio High School Athletic Association, which is the leader for high school athletics policies and things like that. They have been a wonderful support, especially in our fight against these anti-trans bills that have been introduced in the State House. So thank you to our sponsors for making this possible today. And then the second thing that I have for you is at Equality Ohio, we always try to make sure that we're making those connections between LGBTQ folks and their legislators. So we have a greeting from one of our legislators, and it is actually Senate Minority Leader Kenny Yuko, who represents the Northeast Ohio area, and he has been a champ for LGBTQ issues and a supporter. So we're gonna hear a little video from him.
Hi, I'm Ohio Senate Minority Leader Kenny Yuko. I'd like to thank Equality Ohio for all the work it does to support LGBTQ Ohioans and move our state fiercely forward. Here in the legislature, Senate Democrats will always stand up to injustice and advocate for policies that fight discrimination. This includes speaking out against provisions in the next state budget that would restrict LGBTQ Ohioans access to health care and other legislation that would prevent Ohioans from living freely, including a bill that would prevent transgender children from playing sports in school. I'm committed to fighting for well-being of all workers and families in Ohio. Hate has no place here. All Ohioans deserve to feel safe, welcome, and able to reach their fullest potential. Happy Pride Month.
Thank you, Senator Yuko. And even with his colorful tie there, he was ready to go, showing his support in multiple ways. Great. I hope you are ready. I am as ready as I can be for this fantastic panel of leaders today. So I want to do just a couple of brief pieces of introduction here. So our moderator for the panel today is Ryan Clopton-Zymler, who has been an advocate and an activist and an incredible leader in the LGBTQ community in Northeast Ohio and throughout the state for years and years now. And now he is a co-founder of Sage and Maven. And so excited to see all of the ways that continues to grow. So he's our moderator today. Our other panelists, I'm gonna start here. Darius Stubbs is vice chair of TransOhio and is an artist and a poet and has been doing incredible work. Also Northeast Ohio, where Cleveland is just representing today, but also throughout the state. And we have Ellen Euclide, who is calling in today, and Ellen has been involved in all kinds of spaces, and is currently doing work as a paralegal, but has been an advocate on a lot of different issues, including anti-racism, and queer issues as well. We're so excited to have Ellen here, and last and certainly not least, Sheena Barnes, Executive Director of Equality Toledo, who has been a champion in Toledo and has really taken that organization to the next level. We're so grateful for your leadership in Toledo, and I'm gonna hush my mouth now and listen to you all. I'm gonna pass it on to Ryan. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thanks to Equality Ohio and all of the sponsors for having us today. I'm really, really excited to get the opportunity to facilitate this panel on intersectionality and the both and components of being members of the LGBTQ+ community. Again, my name is Ryan Clopton-Zymler. My pronouns are he, they. I am a queer, Black, non-binary, AMAB femme who lives in as many intersections as possible. And as Gwen said, I am a co-founder of Sage and Maven. And my business partner's on here, so I'm just going to shout out Seven. Hey. We're here today to talk about our experiences holding intersectional identities and ultimately, I think how it impacts our work as activists, as advocates, as movement makers. It's crucial that, first we acknowledge Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black lesbian feminist legal scholar who coined the term intersectionality, which acknowledges the fact that we hold multiple facets of our identity, and also acknowledges the fact that within those sort of interlocking identities, we have the opportunity to experience certain forms of privilege, but also experience certain forms of marginalization and oppression. And unfortunately, the more prominent those intersections are, especially when they have to do with race and gender, the more likely we are to experience those instances of interpersonal and/or systemic discrimination. But as a rule, I really don't like talking about our trauma too much as a community, so I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible. I do have one question around it, but I think it's really important that we also just focus on our humanity and the strength and fascinating people that we are. So my first question to you all, and I think we'll just go Sheena and then Darius and then Ellen, just so we can call it out ahead of time. If you could talk about sort of your experience in understanding your intersectional identities, what was that process like for you to fully synthesize them or to fully integrate them?
Okay, we come out the box with good ones here.
Swinging.
So I think for me, my journey was kind of just finding the wording. Because I know I'm a Black woman and I knew I was a Black bisexual woman, and I started exploring that and what that meant for me. And then all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm a bi queer woman. This is awesome. But I started to see that my spaces didn't intertwine together. And so I had to figure out how to be present in both different spaces and be who I am unapologetically. And that took some time to grow and understand, what do that mean? What do that mean when I say I'm a proud Black woman? So when people question me about those things, I don't shake. I don't get nervous. I don't back down from that. It's me in this space, in the Black space, I'm a queer woman. And in the queer space, I'm a Black woman. And I think when they intertwine for me is when I started looking outside myself and say, I have to represent me for the other Black queer folks who don't understand the intersectionality and the what's I'm saying, discrimination on top of each other. And seeing me hopefully will say, okay, I can be both and be proud of both and be the same at both times, So that's why I think I kind of grasped my intersectionality and became even more prouder as a Black queer woman.
I don't think that I have fully synthesized the intersectionality of the multiple identities that I hold. I think that I'm always trying to figure out who I am or how I am representing myself depending on what group I'm in. For example, I am an artist, and in Cleveland, a lot of artists' space are predominantly white. So my Blackness becomes more of an issue or a sticking point in those sort of spaces, as opposed to my queerness, because I am usually assumed to be cis and straight. And so I don't usually have to make allowances for those parts of my identities. And depending on where I am, sometimes my queerness is an issue, sometimes my transness is an issue. So I feel like where I am in my journey is that those the ways in which my identities are synthesizing are sort of like rolling out ahead of me, and I'm just trying to keep up. And and because we as queer folk are still developing language to describe ourselves and our siblings, that's always, I find that ever changing. And so that, and if as new words and new terms pop up that sort of clarify the gender and sexuality galaxy, I find myself sort of saying, oh, okay, that word makes more sense to me. That term makes more sense. So I feel like for me, it's going to be a perpetual journey of finding the ways in which my pieces all lock together.
So yeah, I as a cis white woman, those are not identities that usually get named. So I think I came into those a lot later as I was more in anti-racism spaces. But the other identity I hold that is hard to see on Zoom is that I have a very visible physical disability. And I am 99.9% of the time the only person in a wheelchair in the room. And so that is an identity that I haven't fully integrated either. I think it's one I came to as a teenager when I was sent to some summer camps for disabled kids. Before that, I didn't even really have any language for it. And so I think those sorts of spaces that are specific, a lot of, I think cis white people don't understand the importance of like holding a caucus for the Black people in the group, or just making those spaces. Maybe as queer people, we sometimes recognize it, but that is something I really push for always, because as a disabled person, it has been enormously important to my identity making. And maybe towards that process of synthesizing the identities together, like Darius, I don't think I'm anywhere. I have not synthesized them fully. But yeah, that's a journey we're all on, and hopefully doing better with as in queer spaces too, especially with pushing these conversations forward and helping people come as their really full selves.
Thank you for sharing those, I think, really sort of crucial points of understanding, and also acknowledging that like we are not even all the way there yet in some instances. I think we assume when we see these folks who are, vocal advocates, who are sort of out front and seen as leaders in their communities, that they've got it figured out. And that is, as we've just kind of covered over the last couple of minutes, that's not always the case. We're still figuring ourselves out. It's one of the tenets of, unlearning white supremacy, is that pushing back on the either or binary and consistently being committed to learning. Personally, I'm just getting comfortable using language around being non-binary and what it means for me as a person, and a person who exists in this body where traditionally being non-binary is seen as being a lot more androgynous, more often than not white, in smaller bodies, and I am not any of those things. I just got the ability to fully connect my mustache, so that's a whole milestone for me. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we are all on this road together, and we are kind of bringing each other along. And so this isn't one of the questions. Two things. I want to acknowledge the fact that when I sent out these questions, I participated in erasure, because as a queer Black person, I focus my intersections around the identities that I am the most familiar with, which have to do with race and sexual orientation, gender identity. And as an able-bodied person, I frequently don't acknowledge people who are disabled as being included in these intersections. So, I wrote these questions and sent them to you all. And in my explanation of one of the questions, I talked about, what it's like to be queer in Black spaces, or, trans in cis spaces, and didn't even acknowledge, the impact of having a disability, and that in and of itself is, you know, part of the issue when we're talking about intersectionality, is that we forget we don't have those levels of awareness around the identities that we don't hold. So the second thing that I'm going to say is I'm going to pivot, because I wrote a question that I was sort of inspired by as I was listening to everyone talk. How do we call each other in? So we are a community of imperfect people who hold these fascinating identities that, as Darius said, I love the idea of it being a galaxy, because there are unknown places for us to still find. And so as we're doing that, we're learning how to hold space for one another. How do we effectively call each other in and still maintain that sense of community?
Yeah, well, thank you for acknowledging that, Ryan. And I think, honestly, that's one way to call people in. Like, I did notice that in your question. And knowing that this is a welcoming space where we're talking about these issues, I just put that out there first, right? And hope and trust that you, as a good person who thinks about these things, will notice it in yourself. So I think sometimes it can be just that easy in an ideal world, right? And I do find myself in trying to be, I'm not always a good self-advocate, and I've tried to push disability as a identity in lots of spaces recently, even about disabilities that I haven't experienced. So that's something I'm really working on lately. And I learned that from queer spaces and from people of color who are great advocates for inclusive spaces, and just watching them refuse to not say it. And so I have appreciated some really good call-ins and some painful call-outs on issues of race, especially, and learned from those people who were willing to teach me. That's really all it's the only wisdom I've got on it.
While Sheena and Darius are, so I see Darius is prepped, I want to acknowledge that our final panelist joined us. Hi, Reggie. We'll do an introduction once we get through these last answers with Sheena and Darius.
When I first started sort of finding myself inside of community organizing spaces and activist spaces, there was this sort of saying that would pop up that I like to reference. It's just when you are entering a space of intersectional identities, which is going to be every space, you, especially if they are identities that you don't hold, you should enter prepared to be offended and prepared to offend, and then to be able to move through those clashes with an openness and a generosity, and be able to, you know, talk about them. But I think that part of calling in is acknowledging that even in groups where identities are shared, there may be a diversity of thought, or diversity of understanding, or diversity of perspective. And so you have to be willing to listen, but also advocate for yourself when you need to. And I think that sort of like generosity of spirit is necessary in order to build community, and to build coalition around that community, and to not resort to blocking off entire individuals because someone says something problematic. You know, if we all know that we're in the work together and we're assuming good intentions, then we should be able to be generous enough to work through those situations and issues where we can clash.
Yeah, I think my answer is going to be similar to what Ellen and Darius said. When I'm thinking about this question, it's two things. First, get uncomfortable, because I think when we are talking about spaces, we're comfortable seeing who we think should be there. We don't think about, a lot of things we get called out for here in Toledo is you have an event, it's wonderful, you're, uplifting, people of color, seniors and all this other stuff, but what about the deaf community? It's like, oh crap, like this is wonderful, but what is the space when you can't relate to it because you're not welcomed, because you're not having the communication, brought to you. And so we have to get uncomfortable thinking that this is it. We're intersectional right here. We got everybody here just because we think what we know people are supposed to be here. The second thing, I think Darius kind of hinted to it, correct me if I'm wrong, is especially what I see now, and it's been kind of a trend, is a difference between calling out and canceling. And we walk a fine line of that. And so even for myself, I get in trouble because I stand up for that person who got it wrong that one time, because that's my accomplice. Usually they don't look like me or identify as me, and I need them in that room to tear down the system that we're trying to tear down. But I can't get in that room to get the information, so I need them in there. And if I cancel them, now that's my accomplice that I can't get the information on. So we have to be really careful when we're thinking about calling in. Once again, it's just not people who look like us or identify as us or live with us or whatever. It's really people who are on the outsides. We need to call in. We can't do that if we continue to cancel them before they even get to the doorstep.
Thank you for that. Gwen, do you want to intro Reggie?
Thank you so much, Ryan. This is such rich conversation, and so want to just welcome Reggie Harris here, who is our wonderful Equality Ohio board, has been board chair for a while, and I think now is serving as board vice chair, but is also an artist and an advocate in the Cincinnati area. And there was miscommunication from our end about time, so this is not on him at all. I want to make that clear, but so grateful that he is able to join us and bring all that he has to this space. So welcome, Reggie.
Thank you. And I appreciate that clarification because, I'm sensitive about being a Black person showing up late. So,
That was on me. That was on us.
No.
Yep.
I appreciate coming in on this really rich conversation. Reggie Harris, live in Cincinnati, been involved with Equality Ohio now for, 5 years. It's an organization that I adore. I think there are bios, whatever. I'm with my people. I do want to just jump in on that last question because I particularly love what Sheena said about canceling. And there's some layers to this cancel, call in, call out culture that is like, first I get really frustrated with, to me, I have experienced a direct correlation with privilege and canceling. So there's a lot of privileged folks that have access to things that are quick to cancel folks. And so that's interesting. And canceling on behalf of communities where you're like, oh, no, that person just got it wrong. But I'm gonna get in the room, I'm gonna parlay with them, we'll get them together. I'm good. I don't need you to cancel them, right? Because, of inelegance. But then there's also, I think that gets missed is this thing about spirit, right? And it's not tangible, but there's spirit. And I wrestle with this, right? Language is important and how we identify people and the pronouns that we use in the way that, because when we use the right language, people feel seen. And I recognize that, so know that this is a value of mine. But then sometimes I think the language gets in the way of people's spirit, right? So I think about some of my Black aunties. My Black aunties are gonna jack up your pronouns every time. My Black aunties are gonna call your partner, husband, wife, spouse, lover, your friend every time. They are gonna fumble and bumble and jumble LGBTQ baba every time, but they are going to love you to no end. They gonna cut up for you, and there's always gonna be space. And so to me, there's this thing of but folks, there has to be space for that generational guy and that and spirit, because when we see someone's spirit over time, we can work with the language, right? I mean, there's a performativity and also a privilege to being able to be very fluent in pronouns and acronyms and this and that, and know how to navigate coming into someone and you're not quite sure what this person's identity or expression is. And so, because we didn't all went to 125 trainings on how to do all of, so then that gets real kind of insular, right? And you just have folks who are genuinely curious, and then they're like nervous as all get out. And so then that actually blocks the learning, right? When you come in and you like, man, I know I'm getting ready to offend everyone. I think that Darius, you beautifully described that piece. So that's just my little tail end to that part.
Yes, what a way to jump in with some magic. There's a couple things I think I wanted to comment on and sort of acknowledge too. So let's talk about canceling. And I just did like the full, let's talk about it, like that SNL sketch, like talk amongst yourselves. Let's talk about how it's been co-opted. Fortunately, unfortunately, our opposition in terms of our right to exist in many ways, they're super good at taking our language, and when I say our right now, I'm talking about sort of movement language, and completely misinterpreting it and changing the message. There's also the co-opting of Black slang and vernacular. Like canceled is, now I guess sort of contemporary modern slang, but canceled as I experienced it has always just been something that we talked about on Black Twitter, to be specifically, like, oh yeah, no, that's canceled. And it's a turn of phrase to just suggest like, I am personally no longer interested in investing my time in this. And what it has turned into has become this sort of way of watering down accountability and almost villainizing accountability in many ways. And so, I think it's important that we name that. And to Reggie's point, and I think, everyone has sort of touched on this as well, the notion of grace, right? Giving people grace. And, sort of expanding on what Reggie was saying related to privilege, I think it is the responsibility of those of us who hold privilege to keep our community members safe. So, when we think about bringing our aunties to the function, assuming you have aunties that want to go to the function with you, it is your responsibility to make sure that your auntie isn't going up and through and offending everybody by misgendering them. And like, it's okay for you to be learning. It's okay for you to be wrong. But to Sheena's point, this notion of having accomplices, the people who will not only hold you accountable, but ensure that you have some degree of safety. Those are the relationships that, though they're not always like rooted in some type of privileged identity, I think it's like a privilege of access almost, and the ability to be like, okay, this is my good Judy. They're still learning, and I got them. So if they mess up, just know like I will nudge them in the rib and correct your pronouns for them. You don't have to do that emotional labor. So I think that stuff is really important to like drill down on too. So I'm gonna pivot for a second. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not a huge fan of parading our trauma as folks with marginalized identities, whether they're intersectional or not. But I think too often we are forced to reconcile with the fact that those of us that live in the intersections are often at the most risk for any number of adverse or dangerous life circumstances, especially acknowledging the increased risk of violence against trans women of color, and specifically Black trans women and femmes, and also to, you know, fully embrace the fact that there's a lot of invisible disabilities that we don't take into account when we're focusing on who is the most at risk. So I feel like we are constantly presented with this notion that our lives are in danger in many ways, whether it's from seeing the news or from participating in spaces like this, which I'm grateful to have, you know, some modicum of control over, to be able to ensure that we don't have to be re-traumatized. But how do you take care of yourself in those moments when that anxiety comes up and it's like, wow, you know, I had this moment driving, and this is so silly, but I was with my husband and we were listening to NPR, and they were talking about the lowered life expectancy of Black folks right now, and how we are still, you know, I think like on average, our life expectancy is like 3.5 years shorter than our white counterparts. And I was just sitting there like, what? How do we just continue to live in a world knowing how undervalued we are? And so those moments of like existential dread that perk up, related to all of our identities, how do you take care of yourself and ensure that you can move forward?
I think I will jump in first. I'm very transparent with my mental health. I have a wonderful therapist. I just found a Black woman therapist, okay, which is hard to find, especially if she's queer affirming. So I think, and my trauma comes from, like you said, Ryan, definitely knowing that I'm a Black woman, and I'm privileged because people don't assume I'm queer, because I have kids. That's it. You have kids, you can't be gay, you know? So I do have privilege in that arena. I think my trauma more come from the erasure of my identities. And a good point to that in the media world is the young man who plays football. I should say young person, but I think he goes by he, him. Play football came out and it was like, yay, let's buy his jerseys, let's go crazy, which is awesome. But our queen just ran, you know, Shakara just ran, and she like, thank you, girlfriend, I love you. And people are like literally erasing that. And I think when you are a person of color, you don't get to hold both of the space. You get to erase, you only can choose one. And so my trauma came from when we did the uprising anniversary in solidarity with Black Lives Matter here in Toledo, where I literally got the notes and messages, oh, you're not Black. And it was like, what? Well, you're not Black. There's no way, you're not Black. You know, you one of them. And I was like, look, when I go out in the world, if I get pulled over, I'm not nervous because I'm queer. I am nervous because I'm a Black woman, and I have been pulled over for looking suspicious in my car, or, you know, driving while Black is the term. And to really struggle with that is where, like, spaces like this where I can say that, or finding my queer people of color and be like, yeah, that we can't, like, and I'm an executive director, and like literally when I'm thinking I have to advocate for all in different areas, some areas I'm like, oh God, would they literally arrest me or beat me up because I'm Black or because I'm queer? Or maybe both. And how I deal with that is literally meditating, taking myself out of those spaces that I think about, because they live in my head. That's not like I experience it every day, but in my head, like you said, you think about it. It's like, okay, if I drive at 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to a suburb, what could happen? You know, so you think about them constantly. And I think the best way for me is to talk to my therapist, and make sure I make those appointments, but also meditating to say, you know, you are here right now. This is your ground. This is your surrounding. And don't play into that mind trauma over and over again. And that's how I kind of function with it. Ain't the best, but it makes me get through the day.
Sheena, I really resonate with a lot that you said. So first of all, thank you. Yeah, my trauma comes around being a Black man, right? And there are ways in which being a Black man in queer spaces, so, so Black men being erased in largely white queer spaces, like, that's a whole thing. When I heard the term, but I think it's sexual racism or something, I was like, oh my gosh, like this thing that I just thought was me actually is a thing. So that, that was helpful. But then in this intersectional part, I when you talked about having to choose, and over again, I don't even feel like I have to choose. What is forced upon me is the protection of my Blackness, is the defending of my Blackness, is folks not trying to erase my Blackness. And then, how white supremacy then is perpetuated by Black people onto me and my Blackness, right? I loved growing up because I had standard English, I had a more standard cadence, I can code switch, from here on in. But when Black people would tell me that I acted white, and what was so shocking about that, I was like, I grew up with all Black people. I had all Black teachers. Like, I'm Black. Like, what are you talking about? And like this, how are you telling me this thing? But that's not my reality, right? I'm not someone that grew up in, an interracial or very diverse neighborhood or schools, right? I didn't have my first white teacher until I was in high school, right? I used to be a professional ballet dancer. My first ballet teacher was Black. Like, we danced for Dance Theater of Harlem. So I studied ballet in a room full of Black, so this context. So Sheena, I think the trauma in that is that there's this piece, and sometimes I have a hard time sort of connecting in queer spaces, because when I come in, I'm not, my queerness is almost always secondary to my skin color. It has been in my experience. And that sucks.
Yeah, Reggie and Sheena, I really connect to this whole white supremacy attacking my Blackness from all sides. When I grew up, I went mostly to all white schools. I was very often, up until high school, I was the only Black kid in my class, sometimes the only Black kid in my school. So it was a weird conflict, because my academic life was very white. I didn't have my first Black teacher until high school. It was Ms. Harrison. She was my 11th grade English teacher, the first Black person who ever taught me in school, and I've never had a Black male teacher, ever. But there was this conflict because academically, I was having to almost apologize for my Blackness, just in the way that I was in the room. I couldn't be too anything, or I would stick out. But also, my family was Black, my neighborhood was Black, my church was Black, and so trying to bridge the gap there has always been like a constant. There's just like constant commentary and constantly judging. How do I act in this space? Do I need to do this? How much do I need to code switch? In which way do I need to code switch? And it also has caused a lot of struggle for me in connecting with other Black people, because so much of my experience was Black kids telling me that I talked white, or I did this white, and I wasn't really Black because of this, and this. And so my entire life, most of my younger life, all of my peers have been white. And so it wasn't until I was a teenager that I started having friends who were Black. And it's like, sometimes I couldn't figure out what to do. I didn't know how I needed to be. Do I need to be a different way than how I am? Because how I am is how I am. So I've definitely got some trauma there. There's also this issue of being queer in the way in which I am queer, and also being trans, and presenting on what is traditionally a binary masculine way. And so I tend to feel a sense of erasure when I am in trans spaces. So besides the fact that I'm a Black transmasculine person, which, you know, in Northeastern Ohio, don't seem to be a lot of us. I also present in a way that is easy to assume that I am cis and straight. And so it's sort of like I have to prove that I am trans to feel like I belong in trans spaces. Because there just isn't, at this point in time, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for like binary presenting trans folk. And so I find that I'm having to juggle with that. I mean, I don't know what I do for self-care. I'm real bad about it. I think my self-care usually looks like self-medication. Lady Bourbon is my friend. So, you know, I'm sure there are more healthy ways to do that. But for me, just like sitting down and decompressing with a nice bourbon by myself, maybe with a book, is like the way that I just let all of that kind of roll off my psyche there.
Totally. I mean, I got the white cis thing going on, but I really appreciate everybody's sharing.
Yeah, I'll say.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
And this is me jumping in like, Ellen, this is your space too. But I think that's what we do. And I am speaking for you, so definitely check me. Because I think because we say trauma and 3 Black people just went, I don't know, and this is what I'm getting from my friends who are non-able-bodied, or, you know, my son who's on the spectrum of autism, where it's trauma because you're not thought of. And I'm like, I'm about to cry my son, like, because he was like, because when we talk about play dates and things like that, well, he's 8, so we don't know how he's going to identify. He's a child, so we love him for a child. But when he knows, they know that I'm different, that trauma. And I just want to let you know, like, I feel that you had something to give to this conversation, just not because you're non-melanin. Okay, so this is me.
Thank you, Sheena. And that is a good point, because I think that the main reflection I usually have on intersectionalities and diversity spaces is the not being expected. And I think a lot of queer people can relate to that on a certain level, and I'm sure other identities too. But the idea that a space is just not set up for you, as if you're not, you know, Zoom is an awesome technology because I think it is, you know, I didn't have to call ahead and ask if there's going to be steps in the building, right? How many activist meetings are held in people's houses? Houses are never wheelchair accessible. My own house is not wheelchair accessible. And so, yeah, I think it's probably not a thing I even think about because of how common it is. So I appreciate you bringing that up as something that counts in this question.
Totally. Thank you for, you know, both of you naming that. And it's, when you said, you know, space is not being set up for us, you know, I think a lot of times when we're thinking along the lines of race in particular, we're thinking about the historical implications of what that means. But when we're talking about ability, like, we literally mean space is not being set up for people. Like, literally, it's, you can't get in. And something that I also noticed, and this is maybe just in my own learning, is like, allowing each other grace. Like, it's okay to say disabled or disability. It's not a bad word. And we get so hesitant around it. And so, you know, I think that's part of our growth too, is like making sure that we're challenging ourselves in how we learn. Everyone has sort of touched on it, but there is this poem that, or I guess it's more of like an excerpt from Movement in Black by Pat Parker that my friend Lauren often shares, that I wanted to read and then ask a follow-up question. I also want to acknowledge we're ending at 2:30, so for the panelists, we're probably going to pause and open up for audience questions around like 2:15, 2:20, so just be mindful. If I could take all my parts with me when I go somewhere and not have to say to one of them, no, you stay home tonight, you won't be welcome, because I'm going to an all-white party where I can be gay but not black, or I'm going to a black poetry reading and half the poets are anti-homosexual, or thousands of situations where something of what I am cannot come with me. The day all the different parts of me can come along, we would have what I would call a revolution. And I think that's something that we've all been sort of acknowledging. And my follow-up question is, what do we miss out on when our movements for liberation ignore the intersections that we hold?
This might sound egotistic a little bit. I don't give a damn. I'm showing up as a Black queer single mother from Flint, Michigan that will whoop some, okay? Because I earned that space. That's my space. And it took me a while to get there and fight through a lot of trauma of my childhood that you're not taking that away because you're not representing. You know, yes, I know I'm the only Black face in here, or yes, I know I'm the only queer person in this space, or I may be the only parent in this space, but I'm still here. And you're going to accept me and you're going to love me because I'm going to love you, even though we have to learn some things or unlearn some things. So I just feel like, yes, I know these things and I definitely struggle with them in the past. I'm not saying I'm like, yes, I am. I am that. Okay. I am that because I have to definitely believe that myself to push for those spaces to be intersectionality. Because if not, then they won't see it. If I always show up to a queer space and try to tone down my Blackness, why would they make room for Black queer people? If I come into a Black space and not say, yes, I'm a proud queer woman, why would they try to open space for queer folks? You know, so I think it's my duty to myself to show up and be like, you gonna get all of me or you won't get me.
And so yes, I agree, Sheena. But I also think that, but that's a lot of work for an individual, right? That's a lot, and there's a lot of labor and that's a lot of toll. And so, but what happens when whole movements ignore intersectional identities, we just simply replicate the violence of capitalistic systems. I mean, it's just like, it's a replication of those systems with like, including a little extra spice, like, okay, like we're gonna do the same thing, but we got like cinnamon's now gonna get the benefit, forget sage or forget marjoram. Like it is a failure of imagination to really deconstruct white male stuff and just imagine qualities of leadership, qualities of being, qualities of existing that are not tied to a demographic. And so, and then I think that like all of our, successful liberation movements, really have been predicated on respectability politics. The civil rights movements was about making white people feel comfortable. And, sort of the ACT UP and sort of, HIV AIDS liberation movement was about like, we're just like you, and it really took like white men dying and being like, no, for people to wake up. And so like all of these movements have been about like, no, we're like the thing that you hold dear. And so where we're just now starting to see this sort of pushback, and I love it, is like, think about the evolution of Black Lives Matter. In 2015, like that was like the thing that like no one wanted to say, and now like Disney is like, Black Lives Matter, Moana believes it, they bring along. And that's kind of how I feel about the defund the police movement. So I'm actually running for Cincinnati City Council. I'm an endorsed Democrat. I find myself occupying this space where, what you say really has an impact. It's like, do you say the thing that you believe, which is really progressive and radical, and know that it's not going to get you access to those spaces so that you can then do the work? And so I'm having this struggle with like, how do I respond to people when they talk about defund the police? Because the critique is like, that phrase gets people all riled up, and there's, defund the police has all of these things that are really good there, but when you say defund the police, and I'm like, yeah, but again, we're talking about making systems of violence feel comfortable, with change. And so I battle with that, because I was like, this is the same conversation we were having about Black Lives Matter. So I just to the question about when we ignore intersectionality, we ignore that real substantial progress.
I would say that when we don't make spaces welcoming to everybody, we're losing so much energy. Code switching is emotionally exhausting, right? And then me having to plan to climb up some stairs is physically exhausting. We've lost your energy, we've lost my energy. And so if I can try to facilitate a space where you don't have to code switch, and you can kind of try and facilitate a space where I don't have to plan ahead so much, then we all have more energy. And it's, so that's just at the most basic level, not even talking about the talent and the beauty and the ideas that we get from that. Just physical energy. We can share the load and share the work of this movement, and have more people to do so.
Yeah, and I just to piggyback, I really think that it goes back to that diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. If you don't have a movement that includes everyone, then you just end up with people talking to each other in an echo chamber, and I guess it depends on what kind of revolution you're talking about. You're talking about the 360 kind of revolution, where you end up in the same place, just slightly faced in a different direction? Or are you talking about, the 180 revolution, where we're on the complete other side? You know what I'm saying? So I think that, and again, having diversity of this doesn't mean we have diversity of this. And you can't build a city if everyone there is trying to build a bridge. Because you just have a city full of bridges and nowhere to get to. You know what I'm saying? So I really feel like for me, yes. And it's that diversity of thought and perspective that we lose out on, which helps to move any movement forward.
Yeah, Darius, I think that was where my brain was the most focused on, was just when we don't embrace those intersections. Not to say that our experiences are monolithic, but there are a number of experiences that are unique to Black people, to queer people, to so on and so forth. And when we're not thinking about the people we're leaving out, we're missing those unique experiences that influence a completely different train of thought. And so, especially around what Ellen was saying with the idea of that loss of energy, I say this as, even a person who has screwed up in the last hour, and acknowledging that is emotional energy expended. And it doesn't feel great to realize that you have, missed a step, or to own that. But the more we get comfortable with realizing how imperfect we are, the easier it is to give other people grace. And that is the part of holding space for intersectional identities that I think is sort of the unturned resource that we are going to gain insight when we are mindful of our intersectional identities. We are going to gain new and fresh perspectives. So we have 10-ish minutes before we open it up to the audience. I want to go back to something that actually Seven and I were texting on the side about how hard it is for activists to talk about taking care of themselves. I want to circle back to the fact that I asked, how do you all take care of yourselves in these moments? And I think Sheena mentioned therapy, Darius mentioned a little bit of self-medication, and then everyone else just talked about like the difficulties of intersectionality. And that is equal parts. It's Friday. We're on a panel with people who it's like very easy to talk about, and we're building on one another. But I will not let it go by without acknowledging that we have to take care of ourselves. And so I'm going to lead by example, and then I'm going to put it back to our panelists so that hopefully you are thinking while I'm talking about how you take care of yourself. I take care of myself by being in community. I have like the blessing of a lifetime to have found this little niche pocket of my family of choice, which I really don't even contextualize it anymore. They are my family, that are queer people of color who had similar experiences to me growing up in predominantly white spaces, and some of them being raised by white people, and what that unlearning process has been like for us. And so to be able to just sit and speak and not feel like I have to perform or I say think too much in the sense that like I am very aware of the identities that I hold and how it might impact the other people who are around me. And there is an ease that comes with being like, that's my sister. I don't have to think about it because she knows if I mess up, where I'm coming from. She knows that that's the, I often, never mind, I'm not gonna say this, but you know, the stuff that comes out of my mouth and I'm like, holy, where did that come from? Like, I thought I squashed that part of my brain that still thought that way. And so that's how I take care of myself, by being with people who I feel like I can just drop it all. And there is this really toxic notion of self-care. Like I really like the idea that people are naming toxic positivity. I also want to acknowledge like this idea of toxic self-care. This like, it's a like bath and like a face mask. Like, sorry, homegirl, that's not self-care, that's self-indulgence. And that's, yes, self-soothing versus self-care. I like to think about it self-care versus actually taking care of yourself, because actually taking care of yourself is like, drink more water, go to the doctor. Like, those are the things that we need to be doing. So don't get me wrong, I love a little self-indulgence. I love bourbon a lot. But the last year in quarantine, I've had to re-examine how I use alcohol and what it's like when I overindulge, and I basically washed the antidepressants out of my body because I take antidepressants and then I consume a bunch of depressants, and that doesn't make any sense. So, you know, this idea of self-care versus self-soothing, or however we want to say it, like the self-care was stopping drinking for a little while and assessing why I'm doing this and how much I rely on this. So now that I've vamped for a little bit, I'm going to put it back to our panelists and say, how do you actually take care of yourselves?
That's so funny. I recognize that, and I am working on this in therapy, because I tend to minimize the parts of me that need care because I'm like, that's not interesting. But so I'm gonna brag. I actually do put a lot in place to take care of myself. I go to the gym every morning, Monday through Friday. I get up at 6 a.m. and I go to the gym because for me, movement is life, and it just keeps my mental health in check. I see my therapist every other week, religiously carve that time out. And I have a bunch of like Instagram pages that are just like, you know, Black shit that makes me laugh. I watch, it makes me joyful. The page, They Have Range, where I can just hear people choir singing covers of, you know, intro to riffs and different memes. And so those things are important to me because one, it's like, you know, for me, movement is life, but two, it's being a Black person that exists predominantly in a white space, needing to have those, you know, connections to Blackness and boundaries, really putting very strong boundaries And so I don't do that thing where I work at midnight to get it in. Baby, if I ain't got it done by 7, it's just not gonna get done, right?
I need to be better at boundaries. I could take some tips from you. But one thing I do, and this is another identity that's often not acknowledged in queer spaces, I guess, is I pray. I have tried very hard to be better at getting up in the morning early enough to have significant time before I leave for work, for quiet, and not just meditation, but prayer. That's what I do. And maybe take a walk and those sorts of things, and just having that space and connecting with a larger spirit in the world is super important to my self-care. I probably should do more therapy and more exercise and all those things, but we could all be better.
I think, and Reggie hit on that where he was like, that's a lot to be, there all the time. And I think that's my rebellion side of me being so quiet about who I was. But Reggie's right, it is a lot. And so the thing that, besides my therapist that I've been seeing, I love her. The thing that I really do is take a moment to sit in myself and love myself, a peace. Even if I'm very depressed or anxious, or that peace. And I do something, it's called visual therapy. It's something I learned where you go to the mirror and you say one good thing about yourself. And people are like, oh, that don't work. And it was to the point where I told my friend who told me this, I'm like, that's stupid. Okay. And I know that word is not accessible for all. That's not good. That's a word that we're trying to cancel. So I'm learning. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I don't like myself. I don't like this. I don't feel like it. And she's like, just tell you one good thing. And so it literally started off me saying, you know what? You brushed your teeth and you did really good at that. Go ahead, girl. And it builds me up to say, you know what? Although you cried because you said the wrong thing on the panel that day, at least you showed up to the panel that day. So it's just taking that moment to love something small about me.
Yeah, I think I have to reiterate. I don't have a thing that I do. I don't really prioritize self-care, and I want to acknowledge that admitting that makes me feel a little like a child. Like I'm, still a teenager who's just trying to, fuck everything up, but I'm not really thinking about, how to keep myself going. It's something that I have been working on and continue to work on. When I am concerned about myself and feeling like taking care of myself, I tend to write. I'll carve out time in the morning to write, and I'll just write whatever's in here. And that usually helps to center my brain and sort of clear out some space so I have time to deal with whatever's coming. But I haven't written anything for about 1.5 years. So I'm in a downswing of self-care. It's just something that I wanted to acknowledge. Maybe saying it out loud for myself will help a little bit.
Yes, and we'll pour our energy back into you, so you hopefully can find that strength to up the ante in terms of how you take care of yourself. Quick plug, I cannot say I've vetted this, but there is an app that I recently got hip to called ZocDoc, where you put in your information and it can help you find any type of provider you might be looking for, whether it's a therapist or a primary care physician, so on and so forth. I haven't really done the investigation around it, so don't hold me to it, but in your journey, that might be something helpful. The other thing I was going to say, I'm gonna acknowledge and stand in solidarity with you. I am a former licensed social worker. So at one point I was literally like licensed to be a therapist, and I'm the biggest proponent of therapy. And I literally have walked like 10 of my friends through the process of how to get into therapy, and I don't have a therapist right now. So, you know, we talk a big game about how to take care of ourselves sometimes, and then, you know, we don't always do it. So I'm going to pause, say a quick thank you to Sheena and Ellen and Darius and Reggie for sharing their expertise and their experience, and also acknowledge how important it is that we validate experience as expertise. Because I don't got any letters after my name that say I should be, you know, doing the stuff that I do, and yet here I am. And I want to open it up to audience questions. If you are able to come off mute, please do, or you can toss a question in the chat. I also have a couple of backup questions, just in case no one's feeling particularly bold.
I don't necessarily have a question. I just want to say you are all phenomenal people, and listening to you all today has been wonderful. I'm saying this because I have to log off and go to our exhibitor booth and have to go do something. So I just wanted to say that you're all wonderful, and it was very, I don't know, not therapeutic, but like comforting in a way to listen to you all talk so vulnerable and real, and just be in a space where individuals aren't afraid or feel a sense of comfort to share some of the deepest parts of their identity and how that has treated them throughout their lives. And so that takes a lot of strength and courage. So I just wanted to acknowledge that you all did that so bravely and with like effortlessly. So that was amazing. So yeah, so thank you for being here for that. So that's my question / comment. So.
Thank you. I will tell you, it's not as effortless as it seems. I am fully pitting out in my t-shirt right now. It just, wear dark colors, that's the move.
Well, you're carrying it effortlessly, and the dark colors was a great move.
Always. You gotta know yourself. Other questions, comments? Because what I'll put to the group is any shameless plugs, anything you want. I know we want to leave a minute for Gwen to provide an update and drop a link for what's happening at the State House. But does anyone have anything they want to plug?
I guess I would say something is, and we talking about intersectionality, is to love on our elders in our community right now, because that's another group that we do not think of when we're holding spaces. I had a wonderful conversation with an elder, and to hear his experiences that he went through in Toledo for being who he is and loving who he loves, but also to hear that how COVID impacted him so much that it reminded him of living through the HIV/AIDS crisis. And I was just like, wow, I didn't even think about that, to relive that trauma mentally in your head. So definitely, you know, love on our elders and listen to them and welcome them in any type of pride you're doing, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. We couldn't have this panel. They literally hid, fought, cried for us to be here. So, yeah.
Especially when we're talking about grace, I threw it in the chat. You know, we got to give our elders grace. As we've said before, there's a galaxy of language, and I know I can only speak for myself, but I'm certain that other people can touch and agree that as the galaxy expands, I continue to find myself being like, yo, I don't know what they're talking about anymore. Like, just slowly seeing yourself become out of touch is a painful experience, but it's an important one to have. So, and I want to acknowledge what Delphine just said in the chat too, about loving on our future leaders, and getting out of the way for them. Like, one day you know, not like I want to be replaced, but I know that there are these little queer babies who are doing it just as good, if not better, who should be holding this panel, and they just need the opportunity. So Reggie, I see you off mute if you want to plug.
Yeah, so I mean, my campaign manager would like be very upset with me. I did not say I'm running for Cincinnati City Council, reggieforcincinnati.com. We have a June 30th filing deadline, so if you want to give me $3, I'd greatly appreciate it. But I wanted to add on to Ryan what you said, and I think again, when we were just talking about like making room for young leaders, and then also acknowledging our elders, I think there is a way to still occupy space, maybe not being the primary space. And so I think that even this idea of like, I mean, one of the things that I love about Dolly Parton and Patti LaBelle is how they just age with grace. I mean, listen, no one is taking Patty's place, right? Patti may not be, churning out 5 albums in a year, but Patti is still Patti, right? Like there are spaces for people to still, and as I did just about, because she is my queen, her and Dolly. But I think that for us to reimagine the spectrum of leadership and the continuum of leadership and then those spaces, and right, and I think that what's so beautiful about young leadership is the push. They push, and I'm like you, Ryan, I feel challenged. I feel like an old person sometimes when, I feel basic when I'm like, I'm gay. And they're like, are you?
That's it?
That's it, right? That's it. You're like,
self-plug, sageandmaven.com. Since we are talking about intersectionality, we recently launched a professional social networking group called the Lord Leadership Network. That is a space for LGBTQIA folks who are people of color, who are committed to lifting each other up and creating opportunities for one another, specifically in Northeast Ohio. Reggie and Sheena, huge shout out to both of you. You're welcome to follow us along. Won't have the same opportunities for Cincinnati and Toledo, but very grateful for all of you. And also my husband is running for the Board of Education for Cleveland Heights, Mario for TigerNation.com.